My girlfriend moved into the house I bought with years of sacrifice, but when her parents needed $80K, she forged documents to sell it without me knowing and keep the money. I'm 34 years old. I work in construction since I was 18, and like 3 years ago, I finally bought my own house, one of those 3-bedroom houses with a decent backyard and a garage that I always dreamed of having. It wasn't easy, truth be told. It took me years of saving every penny, of working double shifts, of not going out as much as my friends because I had a clear goal in my head, and when I could finally sign those papers and have the keys in my hand, I felt like everything had been worth it. The house wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine, completely paid for with my work, without help from anyone, and that meant everything to me. I remember that the day I moved in, I called my mom crying with emotion. Like literally crying. Because she had always told me that if I worked hard, I could achieve whatever I wanted. And there I was, 31 years old at that time, owner of a property that many of my friends weren't even dreaming of having yet. I met Melissa about 6 months. After moving in, it was at a barbecue that a mutual friend organized, and she was there with her perfect smile and her super charismatic personality that made everyone adore her immediately. She was one of those people who light up a room when they walk in. We started talking and connected right away. Or at least that's what I thought. We talked about everything, about our families, about our jobs, about what we wanted in life, and it seemed like we were on the same page. She worked in customer service at a telecommunications company, nothing spectacular but stable, and she told me she was saving to eventually have her own place someday. I liked that she had goals, that she wanted to progress, because I came from a family where hard work was the most important thing, and I needed to be with someone who understood that. We dated for a year before she moved in with me. It was my idea, actually, because we were spending practically all our free time together anyway, and it made economic sense too, because she was paying rent in a small apartment she didn't like much. I told her, "Hey, why don't you move in with me? You have your own room. If you want space, we can split the utility bills, and that way you save faster for your own goals." She accepted, super excited, and moved in like 2 weeks later. At first, everything was perfect. Like truly perfect. We cooked together, watched movies on the couch. She decorated some parts of the house, and I let her, because it looked nice and gave the place a more homey touch. I started thinking about proposing to her, because I felt like she was the person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. Things started changing like a year and a half into living together. Melissa mentioned that her parents were having serious financial problems, that they were basically about to lose their house because they hadn't been able to pay the mortgage in several months. I knew her parents. I had seen them at family dinners and holidays, and they seemed like normal people, maybe a bit messy with money but nothing extreme. Turns out no. Turns out they had been living beyond their means for years, taking out loans to cover other loans, using credit cards to pay other credit cards, that whole debt spiral that always ends badly. Melissa told me all this one night while we were having dinner, and she started crying, saying she didn't know what to do, that her parents had asked her for help, but she didn't have enough money saved to get them out of the problem. I asked her how much they needed, and I almost fell off my chair when she told me the amount. It was like $80,000, something completely absurd. And when I say absurd, I mean it was more than I had earned in 2 years of work. I told her I was very sorry, but that amount was completely out of my reach, that I barely had some savings for emergencies, and that I couldn't risk my financial stability that way. Melissa said she understood, I didn't expect me to solve her parents' problem, but I noticed that after that conversation, she started acting different with me. She became more distant, less affectionate, and when I asked her what was wrong, she only said she was stressed about her family's situation. I tried to be understanding. Like I hugged her and told her things were going to get better, that her parents would find a solution. But inside, I started feeling that something wasn't right. Like 3 months passed and Melissa became super secretive with her phone. Before she left it lying around anywhere, and I could use it if I needed to look something up quickly or if mine was dead. But suddenly she started taking it to the bathroom, putting a new password on it, flipping the screen face down when we were together. When I asked her why she was being so weird with the phone, she got defensive and told me I was being paranoid, that she just wanted to have her privacy, and that I had no right to question that. Okay. I thought, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe she really just wants her space and I'm being insecure for nothing. But the signs kept being there, more and more obvious, and my intuition was screaming at me that something bad was happening. One day, I got home early from work because we had finished a project earlier than expected, and the supervisor let us out like at 2 in the afternoon. When I walked into the house, Melissa was in the kitchen with a bunch of papers scattered all over the table, and when she saw me come in, she literally jumped and started gathering everything super quickly, putting it in a folder as if I had caught her doing something illegal. I asked her what all that was, and she told me it was just papers from her work. Nothing important, but her face was red and she wasn't looking me in the eyes. I said, "Melissa, what's going on?" And she just shook her head and went to the bedroom with the folder, closing the door behind her. I stood there thinking, what the hell was that? But I decided not to push more at that moment, because I didn't want to cause a giant fight without having more information. The bomb exploded like 2 weeks later. I received a package in the mail from a real estate company I didn't recognize, one of those big manila envelopes full of documents. I opened it thinking maybe it was advertising or something they had sent by mistake, but when I started reading the papers, I felt like the floor disappeared from under my feet. It was complete information about the sale of my house, with professional photos that someone had taken without me knowing, a listed sale price, contact information to make offers, everything. But what froze me was seeing that the person listed as owner of the property was Melissa, with documents that seemed to show she had legal authorization to sell the house. I read those papers like 5 times, trying to understand what I was seeing, because it couldn't be real. It just couldn't be that my girlfriend was trying to sell my house without my knowledge. I sat on the couch with the papers in my hands and waited for Melissa to get home from work. When she walked in, she saw me, and she knew immediately that I knew something, because my face must have looked exactly how I felt. I mean, completely destroyed and furious at the same time. I showed her the papers and said, "What the fuck is this?" Melissa went pale, like literally all the blood drained from her face, and she just stood there without saying anything for what seemed like forever. Finally, she sat down and admitted everything. She told me she had forged documents to pass herself off as co-owner of the house, that she had hired a real estate agent and had listed the property to sell it, and that the plan was to use the money from the sale to pay her parents' debt and save them from foreclosure. I couldn't process what I was hearing. I yelled at her, "Are you completely crazy? This is my house. I worked years to buy it. You have no right to it." Melissa started crying and saying she was sorry, that she was desperate, that her parents were going to end up on the street, and she didn't know what else to do. I told her that didn't justify anything, that what she had done was fraud, that it was illegal, that she had basically stolen my most valuable property. She changed her tone super fast, went from crying and asking for forgiveness to being angry and yelling at me that I was selfish, that I could have helped her family but I preferred to watch them suffer, that the house was big enough that I could share some of the profit with people who really needed it. The conversation got uglier and uglier, and I ended up telling her she had to leave the house immediately. Melissa refused, said that technically it was her residence, and I couldn't kick her out just like that, which made me laugh from pure disbelief because she had just tried to sell my house to strangers without my permission, but now she wanted to talk about residency rights. I told her if she didn't leave voluntarily, I was going to call the police, and finally she packed some things and went to stay with her parents. I stayed in the house that night, unable to sleep, checking every corner to see if there was more evidence of what she had done, checking all my important documents to make sure she hadn't forged anything else. The next day, I went straight to a lawyer. His name was Steven Rodriguez, and he specialized in fraud and property cases. I told him the whole story, and he told me that what Melissa had done was a serious crime, that forging property documents and trying to sell a house that isn't yours could result in serious criminal charges. He recommended that I report everything to the police immediately and that we start the process of pressing charges. Because if I didn't, she might try to do something worse or she might get away with it and think this type of behavior was acceptable. Stephen also helped me contact the real estate company to cancel the sale and explain to them that everything had been fraud, which was super embarrassing because I basically had to admit that my girlfriend had deceived me in this spectacular way. I filed the police report, and the officers took my statement and all the evidence I had. They told me they were going to investigate, and that Melissa would probably face charges of fraud and document forgery. I honestly didn't know how to feel about it. Because on one hand, I was furious and wanted her to pay for what she did. But on the other hand, we had spent almost 3 years together, and part of me still didn't want to believe that the person I was planning to marry had been capable of something like this. Stephen told me it was normal to feel conflicted, but that I had to think about protecting myself first, that Melissa had made conscious decisions that put me at risk, and that she deserved to face the consequences. Then Melissa did something I should have anticipated, but that still took me by. Surprise. She posted on Facebook a completely distorted version of what had happened, saying, I was an abusive boyfriend who had kicked her out of the house for no reason, that she had contributed to paying the mortgage for years. Total lie. The house was already paid off when she moved in, and she only paid part of the utilities. And that now, I was trying to destroy her life with false accusations just because she had ended the relationship. The number of people who believed her left me frozen. Mutual friends, people I knew and who I thought knew me, commenting on her post with messages of support and saying, I was a monster. Some wrote to me directly asking how I could be so cruel to her. And when I tried to explain the truth, they didn't believe me because Melissa had already planted the narrative that I was lying to make her look bad. I lost friendships over this. Honestly, people who decided it was easier to believe Melissa's dramatic version than to investigate what had actually happened. It hurt me a lot, like it made me question if those people had ever been true friends. But Stephen told me this was common in manipulation cases, that manipulators are very good at creating narratives where they are the victims, and that many people swallow those stories without asking questions. He recommended that I not participate in social media drama, that I let the legal system do its job, and that the evidence would speak for itself eventually. Things got even crazier when Melissa and her father tried to enter my house without permission. I had installed security cameras after she left because I was afraid she would try something exactly like this. And one night around 11, the cameras detected movement in the backyard. I checked the video in real time from my phone, and there they were, Melissa and her dad trying to force open the garage door. I called the police immediately, and they arrived in like 5 minutes because I explained to them that there were people trying to break into my property at that moment. The officers caught them still in the yard. Melissa's dad had a crowbar in his hand trying to open the garage window, and it was almost comical to see how they tried to explain that they were only there to pick up Melissa's things, that supposedly I hadn't let her take another lie. She had packed everything she wanted when she left. They arrested both of them for trespassing and attempted burglary. Melissa's dad started yelling that I had ruined his life, that because of me they were going to lose their house, that all this was my responsibility somehow. The cops basically told him to shut up and took him away, handcuffed along with Melissa. Seeing Melissa in the patrol car looking at me with pure hatred through the window was one of the most surreal moments of my life, because how did we go from planning a future together to this? How did the person who said she loved me end up hating me so much that she was willing to commit crimes to get revenge or get money from me? After the arrest, Melissa tried one last desperate play. She sent me messages saying she was pregnant, that it was my child, and that if I really loved her, I would drop the charges and we would find a way to be together for the good of the baby. I wanted to believe her because the idea of having a child excited me under normal circumstances, but something about the way she said it seemed too convenient, too perfectly timed to make me feel guilty. I told her that if it was true, she would send me the results of an ultrasound or a blood test, and I never received anything. Weeks later, I found out from a mutual friend that Melissa wasn't pregnant and never had been, that it was just an attempt to manipulate me into dropping the charges. Her lawyer sent me a demand letter that was probably the most ridiculous legal document I've ever read in my life. It basically demanded that I pay Melissa like $50,000 in compensation for emotional damages, loss of residence, and financial contributions to the property that supposedly she had made. It also threatened to sue me for defamation if I continued talking about the case with other people. Stephen read the letter and laughed, told me it was all hot air, that no judge would take that lawsuit seriously when all the evidence showed that Melissa had committed fraud. He sent a super forceful response, basically saying that if Melissa wanted to proceed with a civil lawsuit, We would be happy to present all the evidence of the fraud in court and countersue for damages, and after that, we never heard from Melissa's lawyer again. The criminal case moved forward, and both Melissa and her father ended up accepting plea deals to avoid going to trial. Melissa was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and had to pay a fine of $10,000. Her father received something similar, plus 6 months of suspended jail sentence for the attempted trespassing. It wasn't as much as I thought they deserved, honestly. But Stephen explained to me that the justice system is sometimes like that plea deals usually result in lighter sentences, but at least they guarantee there's a conviction on their criminal record. The important thing was that it was legally documented that Melissa had committed fraud and that this didn't remain as a he said, she said situation. After everything ended, I started seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Catherine White, and she helped me a lot to process everything that had happened. I didn't realize how much emotional trauma I was carrying until I started talking about it in session. I had trouble trusting people. I obsessively checked my financial and legal documents all the time. I had developed anxiety about leaving my house alone for fear that someone would try something. Dr. White taught me techniques to manage those intrusive thoughts and helped me see that what Melissa did wasn't my fault, that I couldn't have predicted or prevented someone from being capable of that level of betrayal, because it basically requires you to assume that people close to you are going to act in bad faith, and that's no way to live. One of the hardest things was dealing with the guilt I felt about Melissa's parents. They eventually lost their house in foreclosure and moved to a small apartment. Part of me felt that if I had helped financially from the beginning, none of this would have happened, but Dr. White made me see that was distorted thinking, that I wasn't responsible for other adults' bad financial decisions, and that if I had given in to that initial pressure, I would have only been enabling their irresponsible behavior and probably would have put myself at financial risk without actually solving their underlying problems. It's been like 8 months since all this exploded, and honestly, I'm still processing everything. The house feels different now. It's no longer that place of pride and personal achievement it was before. It has this feeling of having been violated somehow. I've thought about selling it and starting over somewhere else, but that would also be like letting Melissa win in a certain sense, as if her betrayal had driven me out of my house that I bought with my work. So, for now, I stay. I've made some small changes, painted a couple of rooms, replaced some furniture that Melissa had chosen, trying to make the space mine again. Dating someone new is completely off the table for now. I can't even imagine trusting someone that way again, opening up emotionally and sharing my life and my space with another person. My friends tell me I'll eventually be ready, and that not all people are like Melissa. And I know they're right in theory. But in practice, every time I think about starting something with someone, my brain immediately starts looking for red flags and imagining all the possible scenarios of how they could betray me. Dr. White says this is normal after trust, trauma, and that it's going to take time, that I shouldn't rush to be okay before I'm really ready. What I have learned from all this is that you have to establish clear boundaries from the beginning in any relationship, whether romantic or friendship or family. Before, I was one of those people who thought love meant being willing to sacrifice anything for the other person. That if you really care about someone, you do whatever it takes to help them. But now I understand that love doesn't mean being a doormat that people can use whenever they want, that you can love someone and still say no when they ask you for something that puts you at risk or crosses your personal boundaries. Melissa asked me for financial help for her parents, and I said no, and that was the right answer. What she did after was her decision, not a consequence of my refusal to help. I also learned that people can hide who they really are from you for a long time. I was with Melissa almost 3 years and never saw this coming. There were never signs that she was capable of something so extreme. I guess when someone really wants to deceive you, it's almost impossible to detect it until it's too late. The only thing you can do is trust your intuition when you start noticing weird things and not ignore those signs just because you want things to work out or because you're afraid of overreacting. Last week, I ran into Melissa at the supermarket. It was completely by accident. I was in the dairy aisle, and when I turned the corner, there she was. We stared at each other for a second that seemed to last forever, and then we both turned and went in opposite directions without saying anything. I thought I was going to have a panic attack or that I was going to feel something strong, rage or sadness or something, but honestly, I just felt nothing. Like emptiness. like seeing a stranger who happens to have the face of someone I used to know. Maybe that means I'm starting to heal. I don't know. Or maybe it just means I'm emotionally numb still. Time will tell, I guess. For now, I focus on my work, on doing therapy every week, on spending time with the friends who stayed when everything got ugly. I've been fixing things in the house that I had ignored for a long time. I repaired the garage roof that had a leak, installed a new irrigation system in the yard, things like that keep me busy and make me feel like I'm moving forward on something. It's weird how your life can completely change in a matter of weeks. How you can go from planning a future with someone to fighting criminal charges against that same person. But that's life sometimes. It throws you curveballs you never saw coming, and the only thing you can do is learn to bat better for next time.